Please be seated. It has changed somewhat over the years, but the essence has remained the same. Go west, young man, a chicken in every pot, a house of one's own, be your own boss. We call it the American dream, and while it has been fueled by noble notions such as freedom and equality, it has always been, at its heart, about money. Getting it, keeping it, making more of it, never having enough of it. After all, money does bring a certain kind of freedom. Freedom to live where you like, freedom from worrying about putting food on the table, freedom to move from place to place. And riches and wealth do bring influence. The ability to shape and mold your surroundings to suit your needs. Enough influential wealth brings power. Power gives the illusion of control over communities and conditions, over people and their actions, over momentous events and tiny details. We like to think of being masters of our own destiny, beholden to none. We are all familiar with some of the most recent and maybe most crass expressions of the American dream. Who wants to be a millionaire? Everyone. Remember the game show a few years ago and their tagline? You are the weakest link. And why? Because you failed to win the big money. Or Survivor, where skills are honed and hardships endured, all for a long distance run for that $1 million. In today's text from Acts, it is easy to see the behavior of the slave girls' owners and rail at them for their selfishness, for their fixation on lost income at the expense of the girls' liberation from possession and oppression. But if we were honest with ourselves, how many of us would have rejoiced at her return to health and wholeness if it meant draining the money out of our own pocket? Do we rejoice when we pay higher prices for gasoline because it now has to undergo additional processing to reduce emissions? Do we give thanks to the IRS for taking a larger chunk of our income to pay for social service programs, health, community projects, and educational improvement? Do we throw a party to celebrate that our decision to buy organic means we will pay up to 50% more for every organic product we purchase? No, we don't do that. The backlog of lawsuits clogging our court system and keeping an astronomical number of attorneys happily employed suggests otherwise. We want our money. We want our money back. We want more money. Show me the money. The bottom line in the American dream is, in fact, a bottom line, reducing our hopes, energies, and life achievements often to a dollar amount. Celera Genomics announced it was the first to successfully assemble a complete human genome. And when it did, the company's stock dropped. The market could care less about pure science and scientific discovery. It only wanted to know where was the profit. Not long-term profit, short-term profit. In the 70s, it was designer jeans and VCRs. In the 80s, it was vacation homes, microwave ovens, personal computers. In the 90s, it was flip phones, SUVs, Palm Pilots. And what is it today? Smartphones, iPads, iPhones. And I don't know how many people I've seen now walking around with headphones so we don't have to relate to one another. Paul and Silas today in Acts were slapped around and thrown into prison because they interfered with the economic flow of some first century businessman. But rather than moan about their unjust incarceration or complain about their injuries, Paul and Silas stayed up late to party. At midnight, they were still awake, praying and singing hymns to God. Paul and Silas rejoiced because their dream had become a vision of the kingdom of God as preached by Jesus and brought into this world by Christ's presence among us. The kingdom of God does not celebrate financial profits, it celebrates human profits. The kingdom of God does not base its success on pieces of gold, it is based on the peace of Christ. The kingdom of God does not judge everyone and everything according to some economic value. It judges the world with justice and mercy. And the kingdom of God does not glorify wealth and power. It glorifies God. Jesus continually alluded to what the kingdom of God was like, without ever pinning it down to one ideal or to one expression. Jesus likens the kingdom of God to a mustard seed, and in the next breath he compares it to yeast. Certainly neither of these examples sound very lucrative. Jesus never suggested that the kingdom of God was like a Lexus or a lush stock portfolio. I know they didn't have stock portfolios and Lexuses back then. The kingdom of God and the American dream are as different as the pursuit of the good life is from the pursuit of God. Jesus cautioned that the kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed. Larger houses, glitzy clothing, fancier toys do not indicate the presence of the kingdom. Rather, Jesus declared, the kingdom of God is among you, in the spaces between people, in the closeness of the relationships that hold people together. There is found the kingdom of God. Jim Forrest tells the story of Daniel Wheeler, a Quaker engineer who had gone from Britain to Russia at the time of Tsar Alexander I to take charge of draining swampland in the Okhta region south of St. Petersburg. And a group of peasants was sent to Daniel Wheeler's house with an urgent message. And they knocked on the door and they got no response, so they decided to go inside to find him. But first things first. Once inside, one's first duty as an Orthodox Christian is to find the icon corner and to say a few prayers. But this proved difficult. Nothing looked like an icon to the peasants. And the peasants knew that things were different in other countries, and so they looked around the house to see where they could find what they believed was the British icon. And what impressed them the most as they walked around was the mantelpiece clock. And so they decided that the clock was the British icon, and so they crossed themselves, bowed before the clock, and recited their prayers. And so the question is, if one of those peasants were to come into our homes, where might they kneel? What has the power in our lives? In a world that squeezes out substitutes for God in success, possessions, titles, and the like, is the icon in our own homes Jesus himself? Which is it? Which will it be? The American dream or the kingdom of God? Or might we as Christians find a way to make it both?